I'm hoping the Big Ten has to modify their system for us.
Probably like getting grade 10 sandpaper rubbed on your face every day.
I mean, we say it all the time, whether, there's two types of turds, you're a sinker or you're a floater, but you're still a turd, right? I
mean, we are about players and players playing the plays and not necessarily the plays.
Welcome to the Varsity Club podcast. My name is Derek Peterson. The guy fist pumping on the other side of the Zoom screen meeting thing is Greg Smith, wearing his Peloton half zip. Greg, hello. How are you?
Hi. I am very well. This is far from the only Peloton half zip or jacket or hoodie that I have. I'm fully into the cold now. Fully
in. Do you and Aaron still talk about Peloton when you get together? Like, is that still like one of the first things that comes up when you get together?
No, not one of the first things. It's kind of tapered off a little bit here, but I suspect it'll pick up in a little bit.
It was always funny. We are here today to talk about the college football playoff, not about Greg's workout habits, which, by the way, have been excellent. You're looking good.
Thank you.
We're here today to talk about the college football playoff. It's not going to be expanding anytime soon. News came out this past week or the weekend prior, that the 11 FBS commissioners could not come to a consensus. They could not put aside pettiness, and 8 people voted for an expanded college football playoff and 3 people did not. The 3 people being the Big Ten's Kevin Warren, the ACC's Jim Phillips, and the Pac-12's George Kliavkoff. The Pac-12, what? Why would you vote again? Okay, we'll get into it. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what's going on with the alliance. We're going to talk a lot about Kevin Warren because I got thoughts, and I presume that Greg, you've got some thoughts on Kevin Warren. But first, I have a hypothetical for you that I have been thinking a lot about as the GOAT and I kind of roll through the MCU in timeline order. We get kind of this itch to just watch everything in timeline order. And it's not the first time we've done it, but we're doing it again. And we watched Thor Ragnarok last night. I petitioned that we skip Ant-Man and the Wasp so we can go right into Infinity War. So we are at the doorstep of Infinity War. So my question for you, Greg, because this is something that I've been thinking about, one movie gets erased from existence. Never happened. It doesn't exist anymore. The other one can stay. You got to pick between one of these 2 movies.
Okay.
The first one being Infinity War. The second one being The Dark Knight.
Oh man. And Dark Knight is Joker. It's Dark Knight Rises with Bane.
Yeah, the Dark Knight was Heath Ledger Joker, like the greatest comic book movie ever made, and like one of the 5 best movies ever.
But an Infinity War is the other. Man, that's really tough. I think I'm going to have to eliminate Infinity War on the back of, I do think that Joker performance was so great, and that movie is just so good. Even talking about it right now, like, makes me just want to watch it this afternoon. So I think we're gonna have to go. Sorry, Avengers, you're gonna have to go.
The interrogation scene in The Dark Knight is like,
even just like that.
It's just peak opening.
The opening scene is so good. The one where when Joker comes to the party and ultimately throws Maggie Gyllenhaal off of the building. That scene, there's just so many classics in that movie.
Yeah. I asked Alex this question and she said, well, it would have to be The Dark Knight because if you get rid of Infinity War, then none of the stuff that comes after it happens. And I was like, that kind of makes this an unfair question because you're right.
Yeah.
But I kind of still feel like it has to be Infinity War because I don't know if I can live my life without The Dark Knight. That movie was life altering.
Yeah, it was so good. But on the side, and I know you did not plan to go into this, but have you been watching the latest kind of like the TV shows or the new movie releases from MCU, like whatever phase this is that they're in?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so one thing quickly, and this is not okay, and we're not. I don't know if we have watched all of it. We actually, when we were on vacation, we watched the Eternals I believe it was, which I actually like pretty good. The one thing that I want to say, though, and I have to say this to somebody, and you're the appropriate person to say this to because you watched them all, is I really like that they've decided to, in these new movies, like actually lean into the other stuff happening, right? And so that there's all these little references to, you know, the snap or like other various things that have happened. And I think that that is like really smart and makes a ton of sense for what they're doing.
Yeah, one of the cool things that I think they've done is they have allowed like these other storylines and characters to breathe without like this kind of like overbearing, we have to advance the larger MCU plot. Like like Shang-Chi was like one of my 5 favorite MCU movies.
I thought that was great. Yeah. So I was totally caught off guard, surprised by how much I like that.
And they just allowed his story to develop without being like, well, how does this further the larger MCU plot until the very end in the end credit scene, which I thought was really good. Yeah, I thought that was really cool. So yeah, I mean, if we snap Infinity War, we don't get any of this stuff. But it's tough. It's tough, man. I still got to do it because I still think that The Dark Knight is the greatest comic book movie ever made. So that's enough comic book talk. Brandon Vogel's ears are bleeding. Let's switch to the college football playoff. So I teased this in the beginning. It's not expanding. It will sit at 4 teams through the 2025 season. That's the original 12-year deal when it expires. There were, I think, 6 like most agreed upon models that the 11 Pac-12 commissioners or the 11 commissioners were discussing. 4 of them, I believe, were 12-team models, and then 2 were 8-team models. Things, if you put a ton of stock into what Big 12 Commissioner Bob Bowlesby said, no one was close. One of the things that's been reported is that Bowlesby said after the college football playoffs announcement a week ago that they did not get close, and they haven't been close. And there's a lot of frustration with specific commissioners about that fact, specifically Bowlesby, who seemingly talks after every meeting that the CFP management committee, board of managers, whatever, all the committee names, he talks every single time. And it's always like the very disappointed uncle or the very disappointed grandpa that's like, we just need to be able to get this crap figured out. But Kevin Warren, Jim Phillips, and George Kliavkoff in the Pac-12 voted against expansion. So they're tabling it until it's time to start discussing what the next contract is going to look like, which means we're going to not talk about this until 2024, probably at the earliest, when they have to start, picking up negotiations again so that they can be in place by 2025. We're sitting at 4 through the 25 season. We're not going to get it expanded ahead of the 2026 season. Are you surprised by that, Greg? Are you angered by that? Are you like, it is what it is? Or are you not surprised?
I am both surprised and kind of angered by this because one, I'm a proponent of actually changing this model. I would like for them to I'd like for them to go to 12 and part because I get there are people that really like 8, but I think eventually they're going to get to 12 anyway, just rip the Band-Aid off, go all the way there. I am also frustrated because I don't understand why they're still talking about so many different models. And I think that if we've learned one thing throughout kind of the last couple of years of different stuff with college football commissioners is that it's really hard, it seems like, to get them to agree on anything. And so if you're putting something in front of them that has so many different variables, I think that that's how you end up in the situation where you are now, where you can't agree on anything because you can't even pick which model it is that we're truly voting on, right? Like, I think that just inherently creates confusion. I don't understand the let's table it to the earliest possibly 2024 when we have to renegotiate the contract, because now we're going to add more chaos into this. We're not only going to be negotiating with each other about what what it is, if you're the commissioners, what it is that we're going to do moving forward, how many teams, what the structure is, et cetera. But we're also going to be negotiating the contract and all that. Like, it's just too much stuff. I also am just stunned that the Pac-12 commissioner voted against this entirely. Because you got to be looking out for the best interest of your conference, and it should be definitely in the best interest of the conference of the Pac-12 to expand, because it gives them a better chance to get in. I just don't. There's a lot of confusion here to me, and as just a fan of the sport, I'm upset that we're not going to get expansion, because I think that expansion is the best way to me to be able to get, like, and parity is probably too strong, but at least have a chance at some other teams rising up and being able to play for a national championship.
Yeah, I think there was some optimism after the way the College Football Playoff Selection Committee placed this most recent field. We got 2 of the 4 teams that we got in were teams making their College Football Playoff debut. And so as we kind of move into next season, there's a lot of talk of, well, who's the next team that's going to make its first appearance? Well, what about like this Pac-12 team? What about potentially Baylor in the Big 12? What about maybe, there's a lot of buzz about Miami. What about one of these teams? I've seen people talk about Houston. And there's a lot of optimism now. And I understand that to a sense, but we still got an SEC national championship game. Those teams are still going to be the best teams in the country. I don't necessarily think going to 8 or 12 teams immediately is going to immediately change that. I think it will later, but not immediately. So what you're really talking about is like, what's best for the sport and what's best for the fan engagement in the sport, interaction in the sport, which ultimately, leads back to what's best for our pocketbooks. And so in that sense, there was no one who wasn't excited, ecstatic, thrilled about the prospects of first round playoff games on college campuses.
Right.
It was universally
one of the
loved.
Best parts about it, yeah.
Yeah, it was universally loved. So why could they not get that done? Like that is a big, big win in the immediate present. And they couldn't get it done. And what it comes down to me, is it just feels like pettiness on a part of the Big Ten. And you asked, why did the Pac-12 vote against expansion? Everybody else is asking that. Why did the ACC vote against expansion? It helps the ACC. The only 2 conferences that could care less about expansion would be the Big Ten and the SEC. And the SEC's made that clear. Greg Sankey's been like, we're fine sitting at 4. I don't care. Like, we got 2 teams in of the 4 this year. We played for the national champion. We guaranteed the national championship after the first round. We don't care. We're fine sitting at 4. The Big Ten is getting towards that place. There was a report last week or the week before from both Front Office Sports and the Sports Business Journal that the next TV contract the Big Ten negotiates, I think 23, could exceed $1 billion in value because of the bidding war that's coming between CBS was mentioned, NBC was mentioned, Fox, and then Disney. The Big Ten is going to be flush with cash, and it's going to get a lot closer to the SEC in terms of the way that it operates from a football standpoint, and much, much farther away from the Big 12, the ACC, and the Pac-12, and then everybody else. So knowing that that's coming down the pipeline, I don't understand why the ACC and the Pac-12 are so insistent on working with the Big Ten, because this whole process has illustrated clearly that the Big Ten is not interested in working with the ACC or the Pac-12. We have this quote unquote, the alliance that didn't have any kind of contract. They just looked each other in the eyes and agreed. It was a handshake agreement. They agreed to work together with the carrot at the end of the stick being non-conference games. And now here we are in February, almost March. And we have gotten from the Pac-12 commissioner a message that they are ready to immediately drop down to 8 conference games from 9, if the Big Ten will do the same. And that was said in December. Now, here we are 2.5 months later. Kevin Warren hasn't addressed the subject, to my knowledge. Maybe he has privately, but I don't think he has publicly. And the de facto Big Ten commissioner, Ohio State Athletic Director Gene Smith, came out last week and said the Big Ten would sooner walk away from the alliance than go down from 9 conference games to 8 conference games. So that's a clear message of we don't care about working with you. So what happened with playoff expansion talk really just feels like the ACC and the Pac-12 voted with the Big Ten in a voting block to just stay in favor or the good graces of the Big Ten, which doesn't make any sense.
It does, no, for a number of reasons it doesn't make any sense, but it really doesn't, because the ACC and the Pac-12, and I know that they would not want to hear this, and I've actually gotten into it with people on Twitter about this for a couple of years now. Like, those conferences are not the Big Ten. And I think that the sooner that they realize that we need to start operating in our best interest and like sever whatever like relationship it is that we're trying to have with the Big Ten, the better. And that sounds bad for the Big Ten as well, because it's almost like you're treating them like you have to treat, like most people treat the SEC, which you kind of, they're off on their own thing. And we understand that they're kind of the top dogs in the sport. And so that comes with some different issues, but you're just going to have to get over that if you're the other conferences. And it makes me wonder, because I kind of like the idea of the Big Ten going down to 8 conference games, just because you are more competitive, I think, for the playoff ultimately by doing that. But I was like, well, what would stop them? Why wouldn't they want to do that? Until those reports came out about the TV deal, which would be helped by having those additional conference games. It's believed that the Big Ten Conference is what is so strong, and that is really propelling that dollar number up so high when it comes to this TV deal. And so I understand it. I don't necessarily love that. But I just, it's just going to be difficult for the Pac-12 and the ACC, which are essentially 1 or 2 team conferences with not a lot of like huge brand recognition outside of their regions, to really be like, yeah, we're kind of still on the same level as the Big Ten. Like, it's just a tough spot for them to be in.
Yeah, from on the ACC side of things, I was talking to somebody. There is a sense of like they don't want to be viewed as just tagging along with whatever the SEC does. Because if you remember back in 2020, when we were all trying to figure out what conferences we're doing, like the ACC and the SEC were in lockstep with what they were trying to do and how they were trying to get through the college football season. And there was like, it was, the way that it was phrased was like, they don't want to be viewed as just doing whatever the SEC is doing or just tagging along with the SEC, which also doesn't make a ton of sense to me, because if the big fear in the ACC league office is that the SEC is eventually going to try to poach like Clemson and Florida State from you, I feel like you would want to be like on good terms with the SEC so that wouldn't happen, as opposed to aligning with like, their quote unquote rival in the Big Ten. Yeah, but that's another thing. And then with the Pac-12, it just kind of seems like they are like, we just need to sit at the cool kids table so that people will talk about us. They got a bunch of problems over there. This all comes back to Kevin Warren, and that's where I want to go with this next. He's got the 2020 COVID mess, the way that the Big Ten handled that situation, the complete tire fire of a calendar year that league office had. And now he's got this. And, they've done, I don't want to minimize like what the alliance and collaboration between the conferences has done from an off-field standpoint, because some of the DEI initiatives that they have implemented have been really good. And I don't want to like minimize those, but the alliance was a football thing. It was announced in response to a football thing. And nothing has come of it. And in some of the football instances, he's got a really interesting resume right now after his first few years as the commissioner. And you can look at the those reports about their next TV deal and this league potentially being $1 billion league. And you can say Kevin Warren gets credit for that. That's what a commissioner is supposed to do. You're supposed to be able to market and sell your league at that top dollar. And if they get close to that valuation, we're talking about annual payouts to the conference membership of like $100 million. That's huge. That's a big deal. That's a win for Kevin Warren if that gets, if that actually comes. But on the other side of things, it just looks like there is pettiness about the way the SEC was able to get Oklahoma and Texas, and that some of that is what's holding up expansion. When you look at all of this, do you feel like Kevin Warren is holding up expansion on his own? Do you feel like Kevin Warren is acting like in a petty manner? Or do you just kind of look at it and be like, if you just look at it in with blinders on and say, is this commissioner doing his job, which is to operate in the best interest of his conference and his 14 constituents? Is he doing that job properly? Or do you think he's just kind of faltering a little bit?
It's so difficult because it can't be minimized that he is seemingly poised to make the Big Ten a $1 billion league. But on the other hand, man, there's just a lot of like head scratching or puzzling decisions that end up happening, or just like bad PR. Like I also just kind of generally wonder if we would think differently about Kevin Warren and his role in the Big Ten if he was just better at PR. And I honestly think that would help alleviate a lot of issues. I do think that there's a little bit of pettiness, though, about what happened with the SEC in Oklahoma and Texas, because I feel like right around the time that was reported, he had some sort of public interview where he was asked about that and said that they were good and that they were like the Big Ten was not looking to expand.
Well, it happened at media days.
Okay, that's what it was.
It happened at media day. Like he was at the podium
talking about that. Yeah, and I remember it coming off to me as if he was kind of caught flat-footed by that whole talk and how accelerated it was. And I think that if that perception is correct, it would then make sense that he's acting a little bit petty about the whole situation. But no one was stopping him from also then trying to broker their own like behind the scenes deal with the Big Ten to try to poach a couple of schools either. The problem ended up being is there's not really a great natural fit outside of Notre Dame, who continues to seem to want to do their own thing for various reasons. So like, I just think that he was stuck on that. But I also think that whatever happens with Kevin Warren moving forward, and even if if they end up getting this $1 billion contract, let's say that happens, right? Then let's just say, for the sake of argument, it's Disney, because that would like kind of disrupt things the most, right? And I'm kind of in the mode of wanting to disrupt some things. So Disney gets the Big Ten for $100 billion for $1 billion.
Yeah, that'd be big.
Yeah, that would be huge. Then the Big Ten office, led by Kevin Warren, needs to go on like an all-out PR offensive to be able to say, look at what we've done, right? Now, they're really good. The one thing that the Big Ten under Kevin Warren has been really good about is like kind of those DEI initiatives and all the other stuff behind the scenes that people don't necessarily talk about as much, especially compared to like football and basketball. They've done a really good job with that stuff. So I would continue to put that out in front as well, but also you would have to just do a better job of getting that good news out there, so that when the news eventually drops that it's a $1 billion league, people don't say, "Oh, well, Jim Delaney was already starting that ball down the track," because that's what I see happening anyway.
Yeah, 100%. There are going to be people that say, "Well, that is Jim Delaney's deal. Kevin Warren will get credit for the next one," which I don't think is necessarily fair. I mean, the PR piece of it is a huge issue with him, because I was talking to people with SEC background who, when we were talking about the 2020 season, they were like, this dude, Kevin Warren, they were talking about Kevin Warren. They said, this dude tried to cancel the football season, tried to legitimately cancel a football season. And I was like, that's the way it looks from the outside. That's the way it looks. But like Michigan's president was a power player in all of that. And some of the other Big Ten presidents were power players. Like Kevin Warren didn't help himself, but he was somewhat beholden to Big Ten league presidents at that time who really did not want to play football season.
Them. Yeah. It's very similar to Roger Goodell and the NFL owners.
And to that end, it's kind of what a commissioner is supposed to do, right? So, I mean, but you know, the piece about expansion, I wonder, and this is, you know, someone else said this to me recently, shout out Spencer. If the Oklahoma-Texas departure for the SEC news doesn't happen when it happened, would we have already agreed to a new playoff expansion model? Possibly. Yeah,
I do think that coming down the pipe is really kind of muddying things up, because it's always just, and honestly, I don't think about it a lot. And then something will happen and I'll be like, oh yeah, those guys are going over there whenever they can get there, right? Like if they have to wait to the end or if they can get there sooner. So yeah, I do think that plays a factor.
And so you brought up a really interesting point with the, you know, like, should the Big Ten, should Kevin Warren have looked to try to add some other teams while the SEC was adding Oklahoma and Texas? And there is so much emphasis with the Big Ten, seemingly more than, you know, like anybody else not named the Pac-12, the Conference of Champions, with making sure that like the identities align. The fit is like perfect. Like, does Oklahoma fit the Southeastern Conference? Oklahoma's neither in the South nor in the East. They don't fit outside of, they're a really good football school and going to a really good football conference. Texas is a little bit different. Like, could the Big Ten not have just gone and said, like, let's add Iowa State and Oklahoma State? Let's get two pretty good football programs to add to our footprint. And then you expand a little, you expand the footprint a little bit more. But like, no, Oklahoma State's academic standards don't meet the requirements here, and they're not up to par, which was part of the problem all those years ago when the Big Ten first tried to add Oklahoma. Oklahoma wanted Oklahoma State to come in a package deal, and the Big Ten said, no, their academic admissions requirements don't meet what we want. What? Why? That can't be the way that you operate moving forward. It just can't be the way that you operate moving forward.
It's so interesting too, because that is like, and I sometimes wonder if people, and we do talk about it, but like I do sometimes wonder if people don't understand like just how entrenched that thinking is within the Big Ten, like just in general, with its member schools on the academic side, and obviously in the Big Ten offices, and that like I think maybe more than any other conference, except for maybe the Pac-12, because there's some different schools out there. Like the academic piece of it is really, really important to the Big Ten. And I just don't know. I don't know if your average fan cares. Well, no, they don't. I shouldn't say I don't know. They don't care. But I just wonder, like, what at the end of the day, like as far as revenue goes for the sports, the academic piece of it doesn't really do all that much. But I understand, because they are schools, like why you would want that piece to line up. But at the same time, like Nebraska, for example, is not academically on par with most any of the other Big Ten schools. But does that hurt people's opinion of the Big Ten in general, academic wise? No. Like people still know that the Ross School of Business at Michigan, for example, is really, really good. The Kelly School of Business at Indiana is very good. Like people don't like knock the entire Big Ten just because of that. So I just always wonder, like, what is it that you're really getting out of that? Because the grant money doesn't change. Like it's just weird. Because what it comes off of is, speaking of PR, because they don't manage that well, it just comes off of is that they want to thumb their noses up at other schools. That's basically what it comes out as.
Yeah. And then you get the response of, well, you chose to add Rutgers and Maryland Those schools, those athletic departments suck. Why would you want those? And it's like, well, they helped us from an academic standpoint. They help us from a research standpoint. They help us from a footprint standpoint. We can move into New York, that kind of TV market. Like, explain that a little better, and you're a little better. But also, it can't just be Notre Dame or nothing.
Yeah, they got to figure that out. Like, it can't just be that.
They're gonna reach a point where it has to be like, all right, we gotta look at. Well, I mean, maybe not. Maybe that moment is past because the Big 12 has added a couple of other schools to replace Oklahoma and Texas, and seemingly they're strong. And I think I was looking at it, I think they would have had, even without Oklahoma and Texas, I think if the teams that are coming were in the conference right this past season, they would have had like 4 of the top 12 teams in the final AP ranking, I think. Something absurd like that. So I don't remember off the top of my head. So maybe that moment has already passed for the Big Ten, and that opportunity is no longer there. But if there's another one coming down the pipeline in the next 5 years or so, maybe by 2026, there has to be. I just feel like there has to be more due diligence into, what a potential football centric addition would do for the conference. Because like the other piece of this is, now that we have tabled expansion discussions for the foreseeable future, there is a scenario where we don't pick them back up. There is a scenario where this is now dead, because the SEC has already said, we don't care. We're fine at 4. There's so much uncertainty about what is going to happen with the NCAA, with the power structure within college football and larger college athletics. Like, who's to say that in 2024, 2025, I mean, that's still a long time away. A lot can change. What's to say that the SEC and the Big Ten 3 years down the road aren't like, we're just going to do our own thing. We're the 2 best conferences. We got the most money. We're just going to do our own thing. The rest of you can figure it out. And then some of these other conferences are screwed. And like the Pac-12 and the ACC that voted against expansion, they're screwed because they can't play. Like there's a scenario where, as it was being presently discussed, it's not coming back. Those models aren't coming back to the negotiating table. And, I just don't think that there was enough urgency from the non-Big Ten, non-SEC conferences and commissioners to get this thing done.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Then who knows what this is going to look like in 3 years? Think about from 2019 until now, like, or even late 2018, a lot has happened, right? A lot has changed in that time. And I do think it needs to at least be in someone's mind as a consideration that may not come back around, that you end up talking to, because it feels like everyone just, oh, okay, they'll pick it back up in 24 and then it will of course happen. But that's not necessarily the case. Those larger questions about the power structure and the NCAA as a whole are only going to continue to ramp up. And so who knows what it'll look like. And we could see a totally different landscape in the next, 3 to 4 years than what we see right now, which could completely alter this discussion.
Yeah. I mean, if you just look at the lifespan of the college football playoff so far, like Washington and Michigan State were playoff teams, like 2016, like a few years ago, those were playoff teams. Yeah. Now fast forward to now, and it's Alabama and Georgia and Clemson in a good year. And then there's one other spot. Like things have changed quickly. And, if we continue with a 4-team model moving forward, and the Big Ten gets that massive influx of cash, and the SEC adds Oklahoma and Texas sooner rather than later, the kind of stratification of the top of college football, it's only going to get worse. Like, the SEC, I asked Brandon this question on the podcast last week. I was like, I can't remember the team that we were talking about, but they had the 8th best recruiting class in the SEC. And it was still a top 20 recruiting class nationally. Like, the problems that we see are only going to get worse. Or I guess, if you think they're bad or think they are problems, people in the SEC probably don't think they're problems, but things are only going to further, as we continue doing the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. I don't know who that team was. My first guess was Arkansas. It feels like an Arkansas or Auburn situation.
You look this up right now.
But part of the issue, though, too, is with the 4 is there's only room for so many. And I get it that there are people out there that kind of like the 4 that say that it should be hard to get into that. But if you're almost always going to have 2 SEC teams in it, and your top Big Ten team is always going to be a contender. In a normal year, Clemson is a contender. And then we've kind of got the Lincoln Riley-led USC team lurking out there. Like, I just don't understand why, if you're those other conferences, why you would not have wanted to go at least to 8.
Yeah. Tennessee was the team.
Wow.
17th nationally, recruiting class, 8th in the SEC.
That's tough, man.
It's
really difficult.
But yeah, I mean, I think, I mentioned there's optimism about the way the field was selected this past cycle. And I would look at Michigan and I would ask, if Michigan doesn't play Ohio State, if they just have average team instead of Ohio State at the end of the year, and then go to the Big Ten championship and whoop up on Iowa, everything else stays the same. They just play an average team instead of Ohio State. Do they make the college football playoff with the resume that they had? No. And the Ohio State win is a big win, but part of it is narrative, especially when you're that big of a program. And so if you look at USC out on the West Coast, 11-1 at USC gets you in.
Yeah.
It just gets you in because it's USC. 11-1 at USC is different than 11-1 at Utah or Baylor. It gets you in. And so if you continue to have Alabama and Georgia, if Clemson is good again, which 10 wins, they were bad.
Yeah, I was gonna say they were, like, we were talking about them like they won 3 games, right. But yeah. Which is remarkable. And I guess to whatever. A one-loss USC team gets in. It just gets in. It's just going to get in, especially with Lincoln Riley as the coach. It's going to get in because one-loss Oklahoma teams got in. Right.
Like narrative is a big deal, and so if you've got that one team on the West Coast, and then you've got a good Clemson team, like there are just going to be a bunch of teams that are going to get squeezed out, and we're going to continue to have public outcry over, team X deserves it more than team Y. And, to some extent, I think about what happened this past year with the way that the field was selected and everybody talking about, well, does Georgia actually deserve to be in? Or are we just like overhyping this Georgia team and then they go and win the national championship? Those are the 2 best teams in the country.
Yeah.
Like, yes, they played in the same conference, but those are the 2 best teams in the country. So, that's a piece of it. I don't know. I just wish that we could get 12. I just wish that we could get people to think collectively instead of in their own best interests and give us a 12-team playoff so we can have Georgia play Wisconsin in the dead of winter in Madison. That'd be cool.
That is what we need. I'm sure Wisconsin is very much hoping for that as well.
Any other thoughts on the playoff that we didn't hit? Anything else that you want to talk about Nebraska wise that you want to talk about so that we can kind of fill our quota for this Nebraska podcast?
To fill the quota for the Nebraska podcast, this is going to be a much more interesting spring than I ever would have thought at the end of that Iowa game. I thought that it would be like borderline depressing. It is actually really storyline filled right now. And so that's good. I'm looking forward to the coverage and providing coverage of that because, boy, it could have been very ugly.
You're drinking the Kool-Aid, man.
Oh, I'm not. I didn't. No. I said storylines. I didn't.
You're drinking the Kool-Aid. You're drinking the Kool-Aid.
No. You do not accuse me of that. I said storylines, meaning we just got stuff to talk about. Not that they're actually going to be good, because I have no idea how this is going to actually come together. Like, I really think at some point we're going to have to kind of talk about this, that when you add basically like 30 players to the roster and change half of your coaching staff, that just really isn't a recipe for you to have success. That's too much change, and how you can navigate that with the head coach that kind of has issues communicating is going to be kind of interesting.
Well, Mel Tucker says what up, first of all, but the comment about the head coach spot is apt. Scott Frost is not Mel Tucker, which is not to talk about, talent level or coaching ability or anything. It's just talk about like personality.
It's just a different personality.
Yeah, the way that they approach things, I think. You're drinking the Kool-Aid. You're all in. Also, their Nebraska football is never lacking for storylines. There's always interesting stuff to talk about with Nebraska football.
That is true. I'll give you that.
They will always find a way to push their way into the conversation.
Always. Greg,
you got a podcast. Plug it.
Oh, yeah, the Straight Up Breakdown podcast with yours truly. This week I had Aaron Sorensen on. We talked about the Olympics and basically how we both did not watch nearly as much Olympics this year, and the multitude of reasons why. You can find that wherever you can get your podcast. It is a very good podcast, if I do say so myself.
Wasn't this like one of the least watched Olympic games ever?
I didn't
watch any of it.
Yeah, I think it was because she actually cited the stat. I think it was right. It finished with lower than Tokyo did. And part of that might actually be because this was the first year that you could watch it like on Peacock and stuff like that and watch it live if you really wanted to. But still, I think there's a lot of reasons. But you didn't watch it at all.
Well, I said that. I watched snowboarding for Shaun White.
For Shaun, did you watch Chloe Kim?
No.
Okay. Well, both of them were cool. It
was just like it was always in weird times, and there was always other stuff going on, and like I chose college basketball over the Olympics.
I just don't think that people I think it's just different. Like the days of like NBC hoping that people wait around to prime time to check this stuff out and see like Mike Tirico and now like Maria Taylor and the other people. Like I just think that people's viewing habits have changed. Plus, just not to go on the soapbox again on the network, but I also think that they need to do a much better job of leaning into being able to share clips on social media. Like the Olympics really would lend itself to sharing. Like if you see like Shaun White do a crazy trick, like I should be able to see that all over the place on social instead of them trying to scrub it from the earth. Like it's just weird.
Yeah, no sports leagues should try to scrub highlights for the internet. It's dumb. The international soccer does that, which pisses me off. But part of it too with me also is that I'll like turn on figure skating and I'll be like, wow, oh my gosh, this is insane. These are like some of the most incredible athletes that I've ever seen. And then the commentator will be like, that was the worst move I have ever seen in my entire life. Technique is terrible. They're trash. Awful.
Yeah, like
they're not going to score well.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't understand this sport at all. It looks good. Congrats, you look good. To my dumb eye, you look good.
I think that's actually part of the issue with the Winter Olympics versus the Summer Olympics. I think that the Winter Olympics is less accessible to people to just watch, to see, and figure out actually what's going on. I think that's another issue.
So, well, for more Olympic discussion, go listen to the Straight Up Breakdown podcast with Greg Smith. It's really good. Also, give that podcast a 5-star review. Subscribe to it. Leave them a rating. It's really good. Do that for all the Hail Varsity podcasts, including this one. We are a proud part of the Hurrdat Media Network. So shouts to Cam for producing this episode every week. Shouts to you guys for listening. Go get your Nebraska fix at hailvarsity.com/subscribe. You can read all of Greg Smith's work. You can get the magazine. It's an excellent deal. And keep listening to this podcast. We'll be back next week. Thanks, guys.
A Hurrdat Media Production.